And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth had been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have 1 mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth.
Hello and welcome everybody to a new video from Jörg, Joggler66, in collaboration with the United States of America, or Rome-America as I like to call it. I am via Skype today connected with 2 wonderful brothers, and we are actually starting something new. I am today at least, a guest on the Brett Norman broadcast system, BNBS. That brother Brett Norman will introduce you very shortly. He will tell you who is the guest, and he will tell you what it's all about. I am just playing the role as a guest today, so enjoy the welcoming of our host, Brett Norman.
Thank you, Jörg, for introducing us. And today we're going to be doing a broadcast on the time coming up to World War I, and then World War II, and then the time that we come to now. It's a big subject, dealing with, of course, the Jesuit order that has instigated all these wars throughout the years, and to this present day, we have our politicians and government, and we also have Darryl Eberhart joining us today from his place there in remind me, Darryl, where you live?
Southwest Central Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And I've only been to Pennsylvania once my entire life, and that was very recently to visit my brother. I just drove through the little, what is that, the southeast little section of the state that darts up along the lake there? Just a tiny little corner, I don't know, 80 miles or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I know Darryl and I are both kind of recovering from waking up here to get together with Jörg, and this is a common occurrence when we do sessions with Jörg, and we're trying to wrap our early morning minds around this terrible, terrible subject that we're going to embark on. And the very first part of this subject is going to be this little pamphlet that J.A. Kensit put together, Rome Behind the Great War. And I'll leave it to you, Darryl, to go from here, if you don't mind.
Okay, and I've written a little introduction, and that's what we're going to talk about first, and that is why I'm staying up so late. And I've been staying up till like 3 and 4 a.m. quite a bit, regularly working on articles, book reports, and emails, because I very strongly believe that the same type of folks who brought us World War I and World War II are working overtime to bring us World War III.
Can I interrupt you there, Darryl, for a second?
Yes.
Yeah. Because you say they are working overtime to bring us to World War III. If you ask me, I don't know if you ask me, but I'm going to tell you anyway, I think we are already in World War III. In my humble opinion, World War III started with 9/11, 2001. World War III is different than all the other world wars that we know now, because this is a war against the civil population of all the countries. And it surely started in the United States of America with pronouncing the Patriot Act in 2001, which is an open war declaration of the government against its own people. And every country in the world where you go to where there is war, there's always war against the civil population. It started in Vietnam. In Vietnam, okay, for a very big part it still was a war soldier against soldier, but it was more a guerrilla war. It was not a war of an open front as you had in World War I and World War II. When you remember World War I and World War II, like the picture that I'm showing right here, where the people are in the ditch and fighting out of the ditches, man against man, soldier against soldier, that was a kind of war we don't have today anymore. Today we are always fighting against the civil population, and that is something that started in the end of World War II. That started with the bombing that Hitler started when he started to put his rockets against London, and it took a very, very high gear in the time when the Americans and the British forced their bombers over Germany and put German cities in ashes. Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin, Munich, Cologne. All these cities were put into rubble, and I especially know that from Hamburg, where my grandmother was a survivor of 2 world wars, and I spoke with her about that. And since then, and especially since the end of World War II, with the 2 bombings of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, no matter how they really happened, because the official story is a fable, it is not true, but anyway, the bombing happened, and that was a pure attack on thousands and thousands and thousands of civil people. That has nothing to do with the war anymore. And the starting of World War III, 9/11, 2001, was again a declaration of war against the people of the United States. It was not a declaration of war against the government. You know, normally in the time past, 2 governments weren't in agreement and they were declaring war to each other. Those were the governments that were even signing notes of war against each other, but not the people. And here now the people are sought out and they are made the subject of the war. Maybe you should consider this when you also read this opening statement, which I have right here on my screen. Maybe you want to react to what I just said. Am I right here, or am I a lunatic?
The only thing I could say about that is that the history is probably going to have some various versions of it whenever it truly gets its opening stages written about. But for right now we're not having nuclear bombs go off.
No, we are not in a hot
Washington,
phase of the
D.C.
war. That's right. We are not in a hot phase of the
Right.
war, but we are in a cold phase of the same war. That's the point that I am making. You know, when you have all these substitute wars that are since all these years, since the United States of America and their allies fell into Libya and other countries and forcing revolutions and quote-unquote the Spring Revolution and this Rainbow Revolutions all over the world, what is that else but war? What is it else but war, what is done since 2001 or 2003 to the country of Iraq, to the country of Afghanistan? Afghanistan never declared war to the United States of America. So what is that? It's a substitute war. It is a kind of a cool phase of a war that is going to be hot very soon. What about the war in Syria today? So many countries are involved in that, many of them undercover, but still the population of that country is suffering from the war that is happening there. So I just think it is wrong to say that World War III is going to start. I think World War III has started long ago. They just didn't tell us. And they slowly heat up the temperature, you know, like with the boiling frog. That's at least my understanding of that. But please, I don't want to interrupt you anymore for the moment, so just keep on answering and reading your opening statement, please, Darryl.
Okay. Authors like J.A. Kensit and Edmund Paris and others have provided, I believe, more than enough evidence to convince an impartial jury that Jesuit-controlled papal Rome is, as we say, guilty as hell in the fomenting starting of World War I and World War II. Indeed, despite papal Romish propaganda to the contrary, neither Pope Pius X, who was Pope from 1903 through 1914, nor Pope Pius XII, who was Pope from 1939 through 1958, made any effort to prevent the outbreak of World War I and World War II, respectively. On the contrary, there exists very strong evidence that Pope Pius X and his court helped to foment World War I, and that Eugenio Pacelli, who became Pope Pius XII, helped to put Adolf Hitler into power in Germany. In fact, Eugenio Pacelli and his friend Ludwig Koss and German Knight of Malta Franz von Papen can take the lion's share of credit for helping Adolf Hitler to seize total dictatorial control of Germany in the early 1930s.
Can I interrupt
Evidence
you?
Sure.
Yeah, just a little point that I want to make. It's some time ago that I read on my channel a book from Irish Protestant immigrant to the United States of America, Leo Herbert Lehman, that he published in 1942, that is called Behind the Dictators. And I just finished reading the same book because a friend of mine translated it into German, and we did translate it into German, and I put out 37 videos reading that book in German on my YouTube channel. In that book, Behind the Dictators, Leo Herbert Lehman makes the point that in the memoirs of the German Kaiser who ruled until the end of World War I in 1918, in his memoirs he said that he had a meeting with Pope Leo XIII, who is the successor of Pope Pius IX, and who reigned until the time that Pius X came in. What was it, 1904 or something you just read? From 1878 to that time, and that he had a meeting with the Kaiser somewhere in the 80s of the 19th century, and that he told him, the Pope told the German Kaiser, he wants Germany to become the sword of the Roman Catholic Church. The Kaiser, a little bit offended and flabbergasted, replied to the Pope, well, Pope, I'd love to, but we are not living in the old times of the Holy Roman Empire anymore. Yeah, then the Germans were mostly the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire in that time. So he made the point, we are not living in those times anymore. How do you want to do that with us? But still, the Pope insisted on his point that he made to the Kaiser. And as a result of this, quote-unquote, Germany started the First World War. And when you read through Edmond Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, and other books, probably like the book from Kensit too, that is in the picture here, that you can see here, when you read through those works, you will understand that Germany only was the chosen culprit, culprit, is it right? The pansy, yeah, just the guy to blame on. And with the Second World War, it's the same thing. What most people don't understand is that the government of the Second World War Germany, meaning the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler, was the most Roman Catholic government Germany ever had in its history. And Franz von Papen, who you just mentioned in your opening statement here, made a statement in the Völkischer Beobachter in 1934, that is a German newspaper, where Franz von Papen, a Knight of Malta, said that Germany is the first country not only to respect but also to implement worldwide the policy of the Roman Catholic Church. And what that led to, you can see 5 years later in 1939, when Germany again, quote-unquote, started World War II. Thereby, Germany doing nothing else but listening to the command of Antichrist Pope Leo XIII when he ordered the German Kaiser that Germany must be the sword of the Roman Catholic Church. Then, after World War II, the keys were changed and Germany gave the keys, or the sword, over to the United States of America. And if you ask me, personally, Jörg, that is the moment when, if the United States is the second beast of Revelation 13, when that beast starts to speak as a dragon, because from that time on, all the wars in this world were instigated and supported by the United States of America. And by that being the second beast that takes care of that everybody will bow down eventually back to the first beast. So I just wanted to share that with you. Please continue, Darryl.
Okay, evidence of Pope Pius X's role in helping to foment World War I can be found in JA, and that JA stands for John Alfred Kensit's book, Behind the Great War, and in Edmund Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits. Evidence of Pope Pius XII's role in helping to foment World War II can also be found in Edmund Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits. Additionally, Eugenio Pacelli's anti-Jewish sentiments are explored in John Cornwell's book, Hitler's Pope. And by the way, John Cornwell is an award-winning Catholic, Roman Catholic journalist. Millions of soldiers died premature deaths during World War I, 1914 through 1918. Millions of soldiers and millions of civilians died premature deaths during World War II, 1939 through 1945. In fact, I believe that I have seen figures showing that up to 66 million people died premature deaths during World War II. With today's arsenals of lethal weaponry consisting not only of nuclear weapons, but also of chemical and biological weapons, casualties, both military and civilian, could easily reach into the billions if we go into World War III. And that is why I've been staying up quite late until 3 and 4 a.m. fairly regularly working on articles, book reports, and emails, because World War III certainly appears to be on horizon. Again, we can work out the exact dates when it started, whenever the big massive blows start to come, which we still haven't gotten. We just have the little fires going right now, but the giant conflagration is going to begin very soon, I believe. In Ezekiel 33:6, we read the following: "But if the watchmen see the sword come, and blow not the trumpet, and the people be not warned, if the sword come and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I," and by that I, we know that they're talking about the Lord God Almighty, "will require at the watchman's hand." And that's from Ezekiel again 33:6 from the Authorized King James Bible. If we fail to warn folks about the danger of World War III being fomented by sinister forces in our world, and that's the same sinister forces again that fomented both World War I and World War II, then will not their blood be required at our hands? And that's something that we all need to keep in mind, is that we need to be warning folks, and we certainly do. Jörg? Norm?
Yes, thank you, Darryl.
Brett?
Say, now's a good time to introduce Michael to the call. Michael from Germany, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Brett. Hi, Jörg. And hello, Darryl.
And it's
Hi,
wonderful
Michael.
to have you.
Yeah,
Please.
I know I'm a bit late. I had to pick up medicine for my daughter, and it has been, and the pharmacy has been closing at 4 p.m. And it was not available before half past 3. So I had just a too tiny time window to make it in time to use. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm listening to you guys right now, and I'd like to hear more of your very interesting lecture.
Thank you, Michael. And Darryl, please, you were going to say something and I interrupted.
No, I didn't have anything else to say. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, so the Jesuits have their hand in this. They always have. We know that the Jesuits are deeply rooted into our government as we speak at this moment, don't we?
I think it's a good time for us to go into the paper that Darryl prepared for us to read today and speak about the 2 world wars and also the book that he mentions by J.A. Kensit. As you see, I have the PDF open of the book here, and it starts with a quote from Lecky. I don't know who that is, but maybe Darryl can tell us about it. That quote reads, "The Church of Rome has shed more innocent blood than any other institution that has ever existed among mankind." And I think surely that a true Bible-believing Christian can nothing but applaud this true statement of this Lecky. And if it's okay for you, well, everybody has prepared their papers, I think, then Darryl can start reading of his introduction and telling of the introduction and about the book of Rome Behind the Great War. Darryl, I have the paper right here in the camera, so you can start reading if you want to, the paper that you produced for us with the introduction and all that, if you're willing to. Or say something else, of course.
Sure, and of course, Lecky was a very famous writer, and I've got here. Let's see here, if we can find. He was an Irish historian and essayist, and of course, that quote was taken from the PDF version of the book Rome Behind the Great War that Brett had sent to me. Thank you, Brett. And again, that quote is so telling. It says, "The Church of Rome has shed more innocent blood than any other institution that has ever existed among mankind." And boy, that is certainly true. And it's hard to go back and since the time that the Jesuits came into being and find a war that their fingerprints that are not all over the war and starting it, and that their footprints, you can't find some of their footprints around it too. So for the investigator that looks into these various wars, he's going to find the Jesuit fingerprints and footprints, and that's why the Jesuits were thrown out of so many nations. Many of the nations of Europe threw them out, and we know that Portugal and Spain and France, I think all of those countries threw them out at least 3 times a piece. And of course, the Russians had thrown them out a number of times. So their reputation, especially in Europe, has been to that extent that nations just kept throwing them out, and like they just kept coming back all the time, and they always would squirm their way back into society by virtue of the fact that they would take over a lot of the education in the country. Of course, that they were the famous father confessors to the kings and the queens and the princes and the mistresses of the kings. So they always had their fingers in the pie, and especially the royal pie of any of the key persons, individuals in the nation, including admirals and generals, etc. And we see that even true to this very day. So if you wanted to do some of the quotations here, of course, you mentioned the one about Lecky, and then Leon Gambetta was a famous French lawyer and statesman who lived from 1838 through 1882. He strongly opposed the Jesuits, and here's what he had to say. He says, "I am fighting that sinister conspiracy," and of course he's talking about Papal Rome, "which uses the forms of religion to destroy human liberty and the prosperity of states," meaning nations. So that's a very interesting quote. J.A. Kensit himself, and we're going to use a number of his quotes, and he wrote this book in 1918 originally, and then the version that I've got was 1919, and that was published by the Protestant Truth Society in London. Here's what J.A. Kensit said. He said that the dark, sinister hand of the papacy was behind the Central Powers, and of course he's talking about Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey and Bulgaria. And the Great War, World War I, is now accepted by all unprejudiced minds. Another quote by Mr. Kensit, he says, "It is our firm belief that Romanism," and he means Roman Catholicism, "as a factor in the state must be resisted and not fondled, for every concession to that the system exposes freedom to its most malignant enemy." And then we've got another quote by Mr. Kensit. He says, "This indictment against Rome," and he means Papal Rome, "as the enemy of freedom is based on her history, her boasted intolerance, her essential characteristics, her declared intentions at any cost to regain temporal power, and her actions previous to and during the war," and he's talking about the Great World War I, what they called the Great War. Another quote by Mr. Kensit, he says, "Our warning is raised against Papal Rome's political ambitions, which she ever seeks by unscrupulous methods to attain." And again, Mr. Kensit, "Through the centuries of European history, it has been demonstrated that Papal Rome is more than a religious system. She is a huge political tyranny." And then we have another quote by Mr. Kensit, "But be it remembered, the papacy builds up an international system which becomes a menace to every state where it is not held in check." And another quote, "In the pages of history, beyond all cavil, trivial objection, in other words, Papal Rome stands unmasked as the enemy of freedom." And another quote by Mr. Kensit, July 23rd, and he's talking about in the year 1914, is the date of the Austrian, and that's Roman Catholic Austrian ultimatum to Serbia. And Serbia, of course, was an Orthodox Christian, Eastern Orthodox country, an iniquitous document that meant war from its first delivery. And of course, they certainly intended to get a war going, and they certainly did. Another quote by Mr. Kensit, the Paris Journal of April 29, 1919, published in a telegram from the Bavarian minister at the Vatican to his own government, dated July 26, 1914, stating that the Pope approved of energetic action by Austria, again, Roman Catholic Austria, against Eastern Christian, I'm adding that, Serbia. Then again, we noted have noted throughout history that there has been a big hatred between Roman Catholicism directed against Orthodox Christianity, and we have seen that played over and over again. Another quote, this one is from Edmund Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, on pages 116 and 117, gives proof of papal meddling in the Balkans, and that's the countries of the Balkan Peninsula of southeastern Europe. And he says, the ambitious plans of the Vatican and the apostolic, in other words, the papal-controlled imperialism of the Habsburgs, and that was the ruling family of Roman Catholic Austria and Austria-Hungary, were then in perfect accord, as in the past, to Rome, and we mean Papal Rome, and Roman Catholic Vienna, the growing power of Orthodox Christian Serbia, I'm adding, marked her out as an enemy to overthrow. This is indeed established in a diplomatic document found in the Austrian-Hungarian archives. It reports for the benefit of the Austrian minister Berchtold on the talks of Prince Schönberg that he had at the Vatican during October, November 1913. And here's the quote. Amongst the subjects discussed, first of all, with the Cardinal Secretary of State, Mary de Waal, last week, the question of Serbia came up as anticipated. First of all, the Cardinal expressed his joy at our firm and opportune attitude of recent months. During the audience I had that day with His Holiness, the Holy Father, and we know that we're not supposed to be calling one Father, but that's what the Church calls him, Pope Pius X they're talking about, who started the conversation by mentioning our energetic steps taken in Belgrade, and that's a city in Serbia. He made some characteristic remarks. It would certainly have been better, said His Holiness, and he's talking about Pius X, if Austria-Hungary had punished the Serbians for all the wrongs they had done. So these warlike sentiments of Pius X were clearly expressed all the way back, and he's saying, in 1913 already. There is nothing surprising about this when we consider that the inspirers of Roman politics. What were the Habsburgs? And again, they were the ones that were the backers of Roman Catholicism supposed to do. Chastise Serbia, an Orthodox nation. The prestige of Austria-Hungary, of these Habsburgs who, with the Bourbons of Spain, were the last supporters of the Jesuits. For Rome, and he means Papal Rome, the affair became one of almost religious importance. A victory of apostolic, again, papal-controlled monarchy, over Tsarism could be considered the victory of Rome, Papal Rome, over the schism of the East. And again, that's Edmund Paris from The Secret History of the Jesuit, pages 116 and 117. And that schism of the East refers to the split of Eastern Orthodox Catholic Church away from the Western or Latin or Roman Catholic Church that occurred in 1054 AD. Another quote from Mr. J.A. Kensit. He says, of course, the papacy was well enough aware that Germany was longing for an excuse to let loose the dogs of war at least as early as 1913, I'm adding. So the policies of the Kaiser, which is a German word for the emperor, the ruler of Germany, from 1871 through 1918, and the Pope were parallel. Germany wanted war not less than did the Vatican, each for their own ends. As a matter of fact, a strong courtship betwixt Pope and Kaiser had been set up, and the two had much in common. Again, this book by J.A. Kensit is very, very interesting book. And of course, a summary of what these quotes all add up to is that the evidence is overwhelming, despite papal propaganda to the contrary, or to the opposite, that Jesuit-controlled papal Rome fomented or started both World War I, what they called the Great War then, and World War II, rather than trying to prevent these two world wars. And again, we always see this propaganda afterwards trying to whitewash the papacy's role in wars, but they very, very clearly had their fingers were in the starting of both of those wars. And my question that I've put here, or questions, is will World War III be fomented or started in the Middle East? And of course, we see today this great alliance with the Russia backing Iran and Syria, and of course Turkey seems to have its fingers in it, and so we're wondering again, will World War III be fomented in the Middle East? Will it be fomented or started in the Ukraine? Will World War III be fomented and started in the Far East? Of course, with the Chinese and they're trying to grab the different islands there where there's, of course, some big oil reserves. Or will Jesuit-controlled papal Rome foment or start World War III as she fomented or started World War I and World War II? And those are indeed questions that we should all ponder. And again, this is one of the reasons that, and Brett knows from talking to me numerous occasions, and I'll tell him, hey, I already stayed up till 4 this morning, and I'm staying up late doing a lot of these things because I am concerned that, again, we had millions killed. Some people believe up to 66 million between civilian and military casualties in World War II. And when we say that, we mean people died premature deaths. They died a lot sooner than they would have if the war hadn't come along. And we're very concerned with today's weaponry, with its extreme lethality, that we could have far more than 66 million. We could be up in the billion figure with a war that involves a nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. And of course, with any major or massive war, with war comes pestilence, people dying from exposure, especially in the wintertime, as many Germans did as they were fleeing from the Russians, from the Red Army. Many, many elderly women and children, as Jörg, I'm sure, is very well aware of from history over there, how many civilians suffered and died in the cities like Dresden, that were firebombed by the British and the Americans. So we're very, very concerned. We're not trying to be mean and pick on Roman Catholics, but we're saying that the institution that is more than a church, it's the biggest geopolitical player on the board. It's probably the biggest financial player on the board. So it's a geopolitical, financial, religious juggernaut that just has this little reputation of starting and fomenting world wars for its own purposes. And like we said, these wars are no longer confined like World War I, where it was mostly soldier against soldier. We found out with World War II that civilian populations were targeted, and many people were killed, again with the like the fire bombings and that. So it doesn't have to be a nuclear bomb. Conventional weapons, as we saw in Vietnam with the tremendous amounts of bombs that were dropped by the B-52's carpet bombing and that you can have very, very high civilian casualties without having nuclear weapons used. So would either of you gentlemen like to say anything or add anything about that? Because war is ugly, and we've all seen documentaries from World War II, and not only do you have that, but you also have all of the camps, the concentration camps, etc. The suffering it's pretty much mind-boggling. It's hard for us for those of us who have not gone through a major world war, especially one on the scale of World War II, we can read statistics, but to actually be on the ground and live through a war like that, and we've lost almost all of our World War II veterans. Just about all of them have died in the United States of America, and I would assume that's true around the rest of the world too. There's a lot of the Russians fought in what they called the Great Patriotic War, and there's a lot of these people that have seen these horrors. They're gone, and that memory is gone pretty much too. And so all we have left is books to read about. But again, I think all of us, and I think all of us would agree with that, is what we don't want to see a world war come along right now with the weaponry that's available to the world right now. And that's why I think some of us stay up till 3 and 4 a.m. Trying to get emails and pamphlets and booklets and things read and written, and to get information out to people, because again, it's something that I'm pretty sure you guys agree with me. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around the idea of maybe even billions of people dying premature deaths. And when we say premature, that means dying way before your time when you should have. You might have lived to be a 90-year-old man or woman, and you end up dying maybe in your crib because of someone fomenting and starting a war. And how can we imagine that another human being can actively be involved in starting a world war with the weaponry that we have today? We wouldn't think of doing it, but these people, they can kill millions of people, and it's the same to them as walking down a sidewalk and stepping on an ant. They have the same amount of feelings as they wouldn't mind stepping on that ant as squashing up to millions of people. They don't really care a bit about human life. They don't care about human suffering. And it makes you wonder when you talk about they're supposed to be the pictures of morality and caring about human rights, etc., but they don't mind putting millions of people through suffering through something like World War II. And again, if you're a young person, and I'm not, I'm 71 years old, but if you're in your teens or your early 20s or something, you might want to go look at a few of the documentaries of World War II and see what it was like, not just the warfare, but the horrible concentration camps, the POW camps, and that they were very, very bad, and the suffering was tremendous, horrendous in those. And again, a lot of people died in those camps from malnutrition, from exposure to the weather elements, and that. Warfare is not a pleasant thing, and it's not like the movies, the westerns in the United States, where the cavalry is portrayed as wearing their blue uniforms and riding in and saving people from the Indians attacking their wagon train. Warfare today is going to be a lot worse than a few people attacking your wagon train.
Thank you, Darryl.
Gentlemen, want to say anything? Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much for all of the effort you put into doing this document and reading it for us today. It's been wonderful just to sit and listen to this entire presentation that you bring forth, because, us in America here, I'm speaking for myself, that we just haven't seen any war, and not to the extent that Europe has seen it in recent times. And rather, we foment the wars through the government. And this subtle aspects of church domination they're incredible. I grew up in a Lutheran church, and it's very interesting. Jörg is putting up this picture right now with the United right at the top by the American flag with all the flags underneath it. It's a propaganda poster for the United Nations. And very interesting that the papacy is the one that is overseeing all of the United Nations. And Tom Fress, we must add, did a wonderful reading of this book, The Global Vatican, that he did during the papal visit. I think it was the 5th papal visit to the United States, to the presidency of the Pope, the current Pope Jorge Bergoglio, a.k.a. Pope Francis. And when he visited, Tom was in the midst of this reading. I think there's 99 broadcasts that he did on First Amendment Radio. Every one of them is very interesting, and I really hope that people will make use of that archive in the future that Tom has been working on for all these years. And of course, Darryl, you and I both know Tom, and we've been Darryl was introduced to me, he brought us together, excuse me. And Tom's just an incredible resource, and you can reach him too on his email, and he'd be happy to hear from you. And it's just a joy to find people of like minds in this world, because there's so few explanations in this present system of government that we live in, how this came about. Why does America have so much power? Why is it that they're teaching us falsehood, so much falsehood in history, especially when it comes to the Jesuits? I mean, they're virtually non-existent in the minds of the youth. I mean, or rather, they are rather well regarded as the premier example of learning in the world. And in reality, they're the ones that actually went against the Bible. And here they are sitting in the place of Jesus, calling themselves the Society of Jesus. How hypocritical can you get? You can't get more hypocritical. So that's where we're at. I know it's a really tough study for most people, and they shun it and they will not listen to it, because it really starts to explain why this church is at war, why we have these two different parties in the United States, the Republican and the Democrat Party, and what purpose they serve. And of course, I don't even vote, and I told one of my clients that yesterday, and I'm thinking that everyone that is behind this papal structure of worship through the Eucharist and this kind of ritualistic worship is under the thumb of this political juggernaut. And they just go with it, They just vote and they just think, oh, this is like playing poker or something. That's just very interesting. Jörg is putting up this picture, these pictures, and yeah, I mean, this is where we're at in America, and we need to take a closer look at these books and start thinking about them in terms of how we were raised and what we were taught, and you know, is really start making some serious questions and start talking about it with the family. And yeah, it's going to divide the families, and people don't like it, but hey, it's the truth, right?
Exactly. And like I said, war is, it's not like the movies. Like most of the movies that we've seen in the United States of America, where war is glorified. And of course, a lot of countries, whenever they got ready to go into World War I, they thought they went, well, it was sort of like the American Civil War of 1861 through 1865. They talked about the people coming out like it was a picnic when they first got ready to have the Battle of Bull Run. They actually had people come out and bring their picnic baskets with them and sit down, and some of the civilian population just came out and they thought it was going to be a real quick, just a couple swords flashing and stuff, and nobody really starts to think about all of the bloodshed. And as Brett had already mentioned, Americans haven't had a major bloodletting horrible war on their soil since the so-called American Civil War. Some people called it the War Between the States and some other titles. But that war, by the way, I would like, if any Americans are, and we know that some are listening to these different YouTubers, I call them, that Jörg and Brett and others, Tom Fress, are putting out, they have to realize that that war, that very, very bloody war that took the lives of up to 620,000 of the through disease and bullets, that took the lives of these young Americans, the cream of the crop of them, that was fomented by the Jesuit order through their front group that was operating out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and some other places up north, but that was one of the headquarters, was a front group, a Jesuit front group called the Knights of the Golden Circle, and they are the ones that fomented this bloody war. The Jesuits were the ones that had everything to gain. They hated this experiment of a republic in the United States of America. They were worried that the popular representative government would spread over to and infect, like an influenza or something, that it would infect the people of Europe, and so they wanted a major bloodletting. They wanted as many people as possible, Americans, to be killed in that war. And so that, as Abraham Lincoln very, very much pointed and very clearly pointed out in his conversations with that godly man, Charles Chinnicky, who was a former Roman Catholic priest, as Lincoln pointed out, he said that blood, all that bloodshed can be laid at the door of the papacy and its Jesuits. And so that's something that Americans certainly aren't taught today in their history textbooks. That history's been stolen from us. That massive Jesuit papal involvement in fomenting the very bloody American Civil War of 1861 through 1865. That shows you how skilled that these Jesuits have been in erasing true history. So again, if you go to movies and that, you'll see the Civil War kind of glorified, showing the cavalry attacks by both the Southerners and the Northerners, what they called the Yankees and the Confederates. they'll show you, guys like John Wayne was involved in a lot of those. He plays usually a Union Army officer, and Errol Flynn, and we had a bunch of these Hollywood stars that glorified warfare. But the people that are on the ground, on the front lines, that are charging and getting grape shot at them, as did Confederate General George Pickett's men at Gettysburg. When you talk about a hot summer day and you're charging up a hill and you're very, very close together, and then all of a sudden a bunch of grape shot rips through your ranks. Imagine the lucky ones are the ones that are killed instantly. The unlucky ones are the ones that end up having a leg missing, having an arm missing, having an eye missing. Again, the horrors of war, there's very, very, very few people realize that when a war first starts. When you take your picnic basket out and get ready to watch the war start, it's not the glory of the horses in the cavalry charging forward. The real nitty-gritty of war are the people that are dying slow, horrible deaths through starvation, disease, etc., etc. And again, it's hard for all of us to wrap our minds around it, because none of us has lived through, as the most of those people in World War II that fought in World War II, especially in Europe, those people are gone, and that memory is pretty much fading. We're down to probably the last 1% of maybe our veterans from World War II in America that fought in that war as military soldiers and sailors and airmen. Almost all those veterans, because for many years I went to the military funerals, and we buried so many of those World War II veterans, and there's very, very, very few of them left. So again, war is not as it's glorified and made to look in many movies. War is, as General Sherman, who was a Union officer during the American Civil War, said in his famous, he's quoted as saying, "War is hell." General Sherman, that was involved in Sherman's March to the Sea, I think that finally ended up in Georgia. The state of Georgia is, it's when you go back and you read and get into the behind-the-scenes suffering and that took place. And a number of civilians, by the way, also died in the American Civil War. Nothing like World War II, but again, warfare is not pretty. It's ugly, and as General Sherman says, war is hell. And I'm sure you gentlemen have seen various documentaries in that from when they went into those camps, the tremendous suffering of the civilians and military POWs in that war in World War II was just horrendous. It was horrendous. Again, many of the prisoners of war dying from the malnutrition, from the exposure to when they were in those camps in the winter. And some of those camps were very, very bad in places like Germany by both the American soldiers that were run by them and by the British. Not so much the French, but the British and Americans didn't have that great of reputations on how horrendously they treated a lot of the German prisoners of war. So that's an untold story pretty much from World War II, is the tremendous suffering of the German prisoners of war at the hands of both the British and the American occupiers of Germany, and a number of good books have been written on that topic. So again, we're not trying to scare anybody. We're just saying war is not as it's portrayed many times in the movie, war is horrible, war is ugly, and as General Sherman, Union General, said, war is hell. You gentlemen, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, yes. Yes, Darryl, it is hell. And in the United States, we are, being, what would you say, given such a false history, so many falsehoods. And yet, at the same time, if you go out and research on your own, you can find the truth. I mean, that's the most amazing thing about all of this, is that, once you break off from the standardized teaching from our institutions and you start learning the Bible, and then you start researching things on your own, you can really, really find out a lot of things and come to a lot of new questions you never even dreamt were possible.
And I would urge all of the listeners to get a copy of that book, The Secret History of the Jesuits. You can easily find it by doing an internet search. But that Secret History of the Jesuits by Edmond Paris, a French author, and I believe he lays out very clearly a lot of evidence showing that both World War I and World War II were clearly fomented by Jesuit-controlled papal Rome. And that's a very, very important book. And, of course, with the PDF and that book's available in e-books, what they call electronic books, etc., you can go back and read some of these old books that you might have had trouble finding, like 25, 35 years ago. You can find books like by J.A. Kensit, that tremendous book that he wrote, and that Brett had sent me the PDF to take a look at, and that was Rome Behind the Great War by J.A. Kensit, again, originally written in 1918, third edition that he had sent by the Protestant Truth Society of London. Again, that book, Rome Behind the Great War, when you read J.A. Kensit's book, you're going to see very, very, very clearly that was Jesuit-controlled papal war, Rome, that brought that war to the world's peoples. And, of course, then Edmund Paris's book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, you're going to see very clearly that Jesuit-controlled papal Rome, again, brought that war that brought so much devastation to the peoples of the world. That was brought to us by Jesuit-controlled papal Rome. So these people, I think you gentlemen would agree with me that it's hard to go find a war since the time the Jesuits came into being, a war or a revolution, that these guys didn't foment. I'm not sure if there are any. I mean, they really, that's what it seems like they got no other reason for being than to foment wars and revolutions.
Yep. That's right, Darryl. And it says in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, I don't have that in front of me right now, the very quote, but that all the slain on earth are in her. It's her. She's responsible for them. The whore of Revelation, which is, of course, the office of the papacy with the help of the presidency of the United States. Now, we know that. I mean, it's obvious. But there are those that are just not going to look at this in the same light because they don't have to. And we're reaching out to you and saying, you better start thinking a little bit more in terms of the Bible, because, and which Bible is it? Which Bible is it that you rely on? Are you relying on a Latin-based manuscript from ancient times, the ones that predate the manuscripts that came from the King James Bible? You might want to reconsider that history too. I mean, there's a lot of things to reconsider, and if we're going to look at what God is trying to tell us in the Scripture, we have to start questioning those who put themselves in the place of God.
For sure. And I think of the courageous men that tried to get the Bible translated for the people in their own vernacular, what they call, in other words, the language of the common man. People paid with their lives to get Bibles into our hands that were based on the correct manuscripts, and we're talking the correct Hebrew Masoretic, because there's two different Masoretic texts. We're talking about the correct Greek manuscripts, because there's a bunch of sets of manuscripts out there, but there's one true vine or stream of manuscripts, the Antiochian manuscripts, and that came out of Antioch, and that, and then there's the Alexandrian, the false Greek manuscripts, the bad vine, if you would, that is used by these modern so-called perversions, these versions of the so-called Bibles, but they're not using the correct manuscripts. They're using very corrupt, flawed manuscripts and these are Roman Catholic manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, etc., that are very, very corrupted, and they're using the wrong manuscripts to start out with, and then they're using the wrong translation technique, because they're using what they call a dynamic equivalence, and they're translating, well, this is what we think the translator says to himself. This is what I think they meant to say. No, we need to use the correct, the verbatim, what they call formal or verbal equivalence that was used by the King James translators in translating the wonderful Bible that was translated into English. And of course, guys went ahead of them, like Wycliffe and Tyndale, and some of them, as I mentioned, gave their lives. Like Tyndale was hunted down like a dog and was imprisoned not too far from where Jörg is, and then finally taken to the stake and strangled. And some people say he was strangled to death and then his body burned. Some people dispute that and say he was still alive. But the thing is he was clearly, his body was burned, and he gave his life because he wanted to get an English translation into the hands of the common Englishman. And of course, Wycliffe. Now, Wycliffe, they dug up his body later and burned it, so he didn't get burned alive. But the fact of the matter is that Papal Rome has always hated true Bibles, has always gone after them with a purple passion, burning not only the Bibles, but burning those who possessed the Bible, who were distributing the Bible. And when they couldn't burn all of the Bibles fast enough, then they changed tactics and decided that they would make people question the Bible, that they would put out phony, what I call phony baloney versions of the Bible, not based on the correct manuscripts, not correctly translating, again using a verbatim, using a Bible that was translated using verbal and formal equivalents, but rather these new Bibles based on corrupt manuscripts and using a paraphrase or dynamic equivalence translation technique, and a very inferior translation technique. And how can you get a good translation if you don't even have the right manuscripts? And that's one of the key things to keep in mind and that's why they've of the Bibles today, the one Bible that is on the forbidden reading list for Roman Catholics is the King James Bible, and that's quite a story in itself. And if that doesn't show the tremendous hatred of Papal Rome for the old King James Bible, I don't know what will. Is that they hate it so badly, and that's the one Bible that makes it to their list of forbidden reading is the King James Bible. So the tremendous price that was paid to get that Bible into our hands in the English language, using the correct manuscripts, using the correct translation techniques, we need to always keep in mind that many people paid with their very lives to get the Bible translated and get it distributed into the hands of the common man in his in what they call the vernacular language, in his local language. Papal Rome for years, for centuries, we should say, decided that the only Bible translation that they would allow was number one, based on would be translated into Latin, and it was based on the Latin Vulgate that the Roman Catholic Church had, not the original Latin Vulgate that the people like the Waldensian Christians and that had. So again, this hatred of true Bibles goes back many centuries. It goes back all the way to the correct old Latin Vulgate, not the Roman Catholic Latin Vulgate that was, again, based on wrong manuscripts. So this war on, this hatred and war against the Holy Bible, the true Bible, has been going on for many centuries, and it goes on to this very day through their more recent tactics, and that is using Bibles based on corrupt Greek manuscripts and what we call basically Roman Catholic Bibles that are promoted and put out by some of these big publishing companies, but they're, again, based on the wrong manuscripts, and they're translated using the wrong translation, or the very, very inferior translation techniques, we should say. So a horrible price was paid through the centuries to bring us true Bibles, and of course in the English we're talking about the old King James Bible. And to ignore that price that was paid in blood, often in blood and often in the flames of the fires throughout history, is to ignore God's wonderful truths that are out there. They're available. They're available to us in English in the Old King James Bible, and we just can't ignore that. We can't ignore the tremendous price that was paid to bring that to us. And the Bible is the operating manual. The true Bibles are the operating manual for the human soul. And if that's what God made, it's just like if you bought we had mentioned this on one of the other YouTubers, is that if you bought let's say you had the money and you could afford a fighter jet, a brand new American-made fighter jet that's worth millions and millions of dollars, would you jump into the cockpit and try to fly it without reading the manual? And that's what it is to walk through life, trying to operate the human soul without the manual that Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, had placed there for us to guide our steps. And that the Psalm 119 is a wonderful psalm in the correct Holy Bible. Psalm 119 tells you all about God's Word and how it's a light for our feet. It's meant like to be, if you want to think you're walking through a dark forest and you have a lantern, or you have a what we call these big flashlights. You need something to guide your feet so that you don't trip and fall, to get you through the minefields that the devil places in your path. To get you through that, you need the Holy Bible, and that's why we have tried on these recent YouTubers to try to emphasize how important, how critical it is to read God's Word and to exalt God's Word. And I just started again listening. I listened to Alexander Scourby reading the Bible. I've got my 3 different CD compact disc players placed in strategic locations in my house, so that when I do my walks here in the winter, because the roads, we have so much snow in this mountain where I'm at, frequently in winter, it's here a good bit of the year during the winter, especially if you have some heavy snows early on in the winter. It's difficult to go out and walk outdoors sometimes, and because of the stroke and that, I want to get my walking in, so I try to just do laps in my house, walking from one end of the house to the other and going kind of in a circle and widthwise in the house. And I listen to Alexander Scorby, and I've been listening to the New Testament, but I put Psalms in one of those CD players, and just how wonderful the Psalms are. And Brett and Jörg know how recently I sent out an email with some of the prayers that I took out of the Psalms. And the Psalms, King David was on the run for many years of his life. The future king of Israel was being chased and hunted like a dog. And he wrote some of those Psalms while he was being hunted like a dog. And he has a lot of imprecatory prayer in there. He's got just some tremendous prayers that when we're involved in spiritual warfare, we need to be praying those prayers. I just think of so many different prayers, wonderful prayers that we can get right from the Bible. I'm trying to go up on my list here, and here it is. And I took some of my prayers straight out of Psalm 40 and Psalm 35. Let them be ashamed and confounded together that seek after my soul to destroy it. Let them be driven backward and put to shame that wish me evil. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Stop the way against them that persecute me, and let the angel of the Lord chase them. David was a warrior, and David had a warrior mentality. And David knew that there was a spiritual war going on. He also knew that war manifested itself in the fleshly arena often, as when he fought Goliath. He knew that he needed to rely on the Lord. David may have, we know not may, he did take his sling and he fired the stone at Goliath, but I think there's some of us that think God might have just helped that aim a little bit, although David was very good. We need God's blessings on us, on any of our efforts. We need his blessing.
That's right, Darryl.
We surely do.
Oh, yes, we do. And that's a really good point you bring up, because this is a Goliath that we're coming up against, just the three of us, the four of us. I mean, it's just so big, it's almost too big for people to grasp. And this is really the case. It takes a lot of energy just to grasp even a small portion of the history, the torment, the absolute devastation that has happened to God's people throughout the ages. It's really taxing.
Not only is it hard to wrap our minds, it is for me, I know, to think of warfare on the scale of World War II, but it's hard to wrap our minds around an institution that would run an official inquisition for over 6 centuries and that would bring the most barbarous tortures. I would really encourage folks to type into their search engine Richard Bennett, the Inquisition YouTube, and just watch that tremendous 58-minute color video that very professionally done.
Yep, and then
shows.
Richard Bennett also has that other video too, that it's Rome uses the civil power to foist its views on all people, no matter who they are, where they live. It's help me out,
Vatican
Jörg.
control through civil law.
Thank you. Yes. And both Jörg and I have that video on our channels, and you can also find it right on Darryl Eberhart's. I'm sorry, Darryl Eberhart. right on Richard Bennett's website too, I'm sure.
Yeah, BereanBeacon.org. BereanBeacon.org, and it's of course named after the famous Bereans that we read about in the New Testament, that were said that they were much more noble than some of the other cities where Paul went, because the noble Bereans sat down and they heard what Paul would say, the Apostle Paul said, but they ran back and they started, especially they'd go back to the Old Testament, their Hebrew scriptures, and they would start checking out, okay, we're going to check out and see if what this guy is saying is true. And they wanted to check out Paul's words against the Old Testament, because the New Testament hadn't been written at that time. So the Bereans were considered more noble because they got their noses in their Bibles and the Hebrew scriptures that they had, and they checked out to see if what he was saying was true. And we would urge you never to, again, take our word for anything. Go back to the true Bible, and if you're English speaking, the old King James Bible, and check it out and find out what God says in his operating manual for the human soul. And then again, that's one of the things that I said that we've tried to do in these latest YouTubers, is that we point out that how important Bible study is. Bible study is critical. Men and women gave their lives, but we think of the translators, we think of the ones that distributed the Bibles, the ones that got them into England initially, and that and other places, that they risked their lives. Some of them gave their lives to get those Bibles into the hands of people so that they could read God's Word in their own native language, not have to go back and read a Latin Bible, even a Latin Bible that was based on the correct manuscript. They wanted people to be able to read it like Luther did in German, and as Tyndale and Wycliffe did in English. When we have God's holy words translated correctly from the right manuscripts, the correct stream, the Antiochian stream that rather than the Alexandrian stream that the newer ones are translated from.
Very good point, Darryl.
We need to take advantage of what these men have risked their lives and given their lives to give us to read, and to let it sit on your coffee table unread is kind of an insult to God. I like the one analogy that one individual brought out one time. There was a lady and her husband was off somewhere, off fighting in a war, and she had all of his love letters laid out on the table, and she goes, I just love these letters from my husband. I love my husband so much, and I keep all of these letters here in there. They're still sealed in their envelopes, and I just keep them here because I save them, and I don't want anything bad to happen to them. So I just keep them in the envelopes and keep them sealed up, and that way they'll be preserved and everything. But
Darryl, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your entire work. I appreciate it, but I really got to go today. So enjoy the conversation with Brett and Jörg, but I'm sorry I'm off. All the best and God bless.
God bless you, Jörg.
It's all right, Michael, that you have
on.
to go, because I have to go too, and I think that was quite a nice little ending that we had here, speaking about the Bible and then introducing the video clip from Richard Bennett. So I would really love to Brett to wrap it us for us right now.
You betcha. Yeah, no, I was thinking along the same lines. It's getting to be about an hour now, and of course, we don't want to make our videos too long because I think most just don't have the attention span nor the time to invest into more than, hour and a half, 2 hours. So very well. Again, thank you very much, Darryl, for bringing this presentation to the table for us. Rome Behind the Great War. And Jörg, thank you very much for all your efforts, and Michael as well. And we'll get this message out and as soon as possible, and we'll hope that we'll see you all soon, and take good care. God bless, and bye-bye for now.
Since World War II, America has encouraged and benefited from the global advance of free markets, from the strength of democratic alliances, and from the advance of free societies. At one level, this has been a raw calculation of interest. The 20th century features some of the worst horrors of history because dictators committed them.
With eyes now opened, look at yonder sight. Satan transformed, an angel of the light. His left hand holds a crucifix, his right a naked sword. What harmony in these, the quickened sense the adversary sees, spite of disguises, as the piercing eye of Jesus did the prince of hell descry. Hid in the form of Peter, so our gaze looks on the lie with anger and amaze. Rome is a hierarchy, and means the reign through priests of the old enemy again. 200 millions of the sacred sway of the triple tyrant and his word obey. Upon them 500,000 priests with feet audacious tread and tramp as seemeth meet. Upon the priests 1,000 bishops climb and cluster on their shoulders while sublime. Above the bishop cardinals appear, and over them the ruler of the sphere. The aged autocrat, and close behind frowns the dark visage of the mastermind. O form half seen, half hidden, black as night, and blood-stained, furtive, shrinking from the sight, slippery, unearthly, calculating, cold, the papal helm and scepter thou dost hold. Yes, thou! The vision startles men at times, and then recedes the mountain of thy crimes. Looms like a lurid Etna twixt the clouds, and while the world is gazing, darkness shrouds the horror, and men think on it no more. Yet there it is in fact, as it was before. Satan himself beneath the sacred name of Jesus followers the loftiest claim, the purest doth advance, angel of light. His name is Jesuit or Jesuite. The company of Jesus, Satan's band, his own militia, his material hand, his heart of falsehood, his most subtle mind, his serpent shape while coil in coil doth wind, and in the folds, the fangs, the glittering eyes, God shall unearth thee yet. Thy sentence lies writ in his book, yea, hast thou never read, the woman's seed shall bruise the serpent's head? He whose great name thou bearest, he shall crush thy hateful head. Go then, thy presence hush. Slip slyly into palaces and shrines, sit in confessionals, dig secret minds, plot, plan, pretend, dissemble, darken, lie. Heaven yet shall drag thee forth and lift thee high, and with its hand of might and holy ire fling thee, foul serpent, in the eternal fire. O monstrous pyramid, I see it rise, it seems to tower and touch the very skies. Man's lofty free morality is mute in the dread presence of the Absolute. The priest is in the place of the Most High, all must submit to his authority. Then in his turn the priest doth bend before the bishop, while the bishop doth adore the pope, and he, well, Satan doth inspire, Satan dark-dressed in Jesuit's attire. And in that fraud, than he there is none higher. Ye foolish victims of conspiracy, what's your pope? A mask, a mystery. The mouthpiece is another. Read and see the doctrines of the Jesuits, who guide the papal judgment and unseen decide the voice of the infallible, and read the story of their deeds. Take ye good heed, to whom your soul's salvation ye commit. Who is it that in truth does yonder sit in that dark Vatican? See wheel and wheel how works the strange machine, so to which ye kneel, and how one name another doth conceal. Apostles guide none now, the church is dumb, the fathers dead and buried, conscience numb, the intellect, the soul have lost their eyes, Bibles are banned and wisdom only lies in one man's breast, and who is at his back? Ah, that's the question, only trace the track behind the papal chair, where to and fro it winds, and you shall meet with wonder, lo, another pope behind the pope we know. Behind the papal chair, where to and fro it winds, and you shall meet with wonder, lo, another pope behind the pope we know. Another pope behind the pope we know.
You were both in Skull and Bones of the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the rest.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look
Are
forward...
you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
Since World War II, America has encouraged and benefited from the global advance of free markets, from the strength of democratic alliances, and from the advance of free societies. At one level, this has been a raw calculation of interest. The 20th century features some of the worst horrors of history because dictators committed them.
If this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. Just so long as I'm the dictator.